And I am particularly excited for very personal podcast reasons.
Not more excited than I am.
For today's episode, which focuses in on ADHD, which I am not sure there is something more talked about in the mental health community or the TikTok community or the online community. It's something that has really emerged, especially with like shortages of medications and underdiagnoses and whatnot. So we are going to have a really great conversation with an amazing expert, Elle O'Flaherty, on this topic. And we're going to cover a bunch.
And it is like a topic that is so near and dear to my heart, being diagnosed later in life. And this may have been one of the best conversations. I mean, she's freaking brilliant.
This podcast represents the opinions of our hosts and guests. The content here should not be taken as medical advice and is for informational purposes only. This podcast also does not establish a standard of care, doctor-patient, or client relationship. No guarantee is given regarding the accuracy of any statements or opinions made on the podcast or website. And because each person is so unique, all listeners are encouraged to connect with counseling and medical professionals for assistance with their personal journey. All people, places, and scenarios mentioned in the podcast have been changed to protect the privacy of those involved.
Welcome to We're Not Fine. I'm Dr. Talia Jackson.
And I'm Doug Jensen. We thank you for listening every week to our deep and thought-provoking conversations about relationships.
Hi, friends.
Hi, everybody. Welcome back
to We're Not Fine, your favorite podcast where mental health meets relationship.
We're going to talk about, so people understand kind of what are the common symptoms, what are the common issues that are facing people with ADHD, how do those issues affect relationships, our work functioning, our personal relationships, our partner relationships, our friend relationships, our co-host podcast relationships, all of those things.
Fascinating.
And then, of course, we're going to talk about how to manage this. And part of the greatest part of this conversation was that it really just encourages an understanding of both parties in any relationship, as we've been talking about forever.
That's right.
We want people to be compassionate on both sides, both neurodivergent and neurotypical. So,
which there's something really beautiful about the way she just comes right out and destroys the stigma around like that neurodivergent, or like if you have ADHD, your brain is the problem and you need to learn how to accommodate the world and do better, do more. And instead, it's more this idea that there needs to be an understanding with the person if you have ADHD or your partner or your coworker so that you can partner better around the ADHD. It's amazing, and I think you're going to find it so helpful. But I wanted to remind Doug how fun I am with my ADHD. And
is that what it's called?
Fun? I put the fun back in dysfunctional. I've got 2 ADHD stories that just happened yesterday.
Tell me.
One was when you and I were chatting yesterday morning when I went to the Black Walnut to go pick up a whole bunch of pastries.
Yeah.
And I said to you, and meant it, oh my God, honey, I am going to go find out if they have gluten-free options. And if they do, I'm going to bring you some to the podcast tomorrow.
Yeah.
I got off the phone, forgot you existed.
That's really, really sweet. I feel important.
Ordered the things that I needed that were on my list.
They were all gluten filled.
They were super extra gluten. I said, give me extra gluten. And then I got back in the car and called you again. And I said to myself, well, shit. Because I was already driving and I didn't say anything to you because I was like, maybe he won't remember that I said that or that I promised that. But that's something that happens on the daily. So
when I came to the studio today,
were you looking around?
No, I was looking around and then I went into the restroom to cry privately.
Oh my God.
Being so disregarded in my relationship with you is hard.
Which is why we're having this session, because also that is just one of a gazillion things that happens on a daily basis when you're in a relationship with someone who has ADHD, right? Because like Rob will often feel dismissed, forgotten, disregarded. There's this like out of sight, out of mind thing.
Yep.
And what we just learned from Elle, that ADHD brains are interest-focused brains and not importance-focused. That changed my world.
But it's really, so it's interesting because what also Elle would say is we need to accommodate that. So when you forget us, so this is where the complication is.
It's just when we forget you.
It's not personal.
That's exactly it.
But then we have to go get our own gluten-free bakery And so,
which in some ways,
I guess that's what it is, right?
Medicated, I am not going to win any prizes for being the most thoughtful, considerate partner, because when I'm doing tasks, I'm not thinking about you.
I'm also aware that
other things.
Yeah, I need to apologize to anybody listening or looking at us on YouTube, because I realized I had a Kind bar with nuts in it beforehand, and I'm like,
is it in your beard?
No, I'm trying to get rid of it in my teeth.
Oh, so are you like licking your teeth?
Yeah.
So embarrassing.
A little embarrassing. And I realized I was doing that probably the whole time.
And in fact,
I'm going to keep doing it.
Another ADHD thing that happened to me yesterday that I thought I would bring up for this episode.
I can't wait.
Is that I also, like you had mentioned in the episode that you guys are going to hear, that you're due for your, is it 40 CEUs by September?
Yep.
40 CEUs by October for me.
I haven't started.
I have one under my belt for supervision, but I was
1 hour?
No, it's like 18.
Okay, I was going to say that's got to be more than
it's like
one.
18. But I was scrambling. I found this
I'm not scrambling.
ADHD, like how to change your brain, or like the changing brain aspect of ADHD. I was like, oh, yeah, it's literally how to change your brain when you have ADHD. I was so fascinated.
Yep.
I found the coupon code. I was just about to sign out, and it was like, you have taken this course already in 2018 and you passed. You will not get credit for this again.
Oh, that's hilarious.
And I was like, well, there it is. That's the ADHD-est problem to have.
That you retake the same things. Like when you and Rob and I went out to a restaurant, you're like, oh, I've been here already.
Yeah, but I didn't recognize, because also I wasn't paying attention to the details. I didn't know what city it was in even, or the name of the place.
Okay. That's a really unique name of the place, by the way.
I know.
So
it didn't really register. It didn't register in my brain.
One of our favorites
Earl
now.
Giles.
Yeah, what an amazing place.
And I was like, oh, I've heard of that place because I've been there, but I didn't remember. I also will watch series. Like, I'm like, oh, that looks good. Oh, and then 4 episodes in, I'm like, I think I watched that 5 years ago.
I think I know what the outcome of this is.
Why do I know that he dies in the end?
Yeah, that's something.
I thought I was psychic.
Those are not the worst things, right? Like if you're enjoying those 4 episodes, those are okay. I would imagine though, for people in relationships, this is where like, and it will happen oftentimes. Like I think what we're going to find out is how to manage some of this stuff. But I have numbers of couples where one person, again, is neurotypical and one is neurodivergent. And the reality is it's about accommodating and understanding it. But if the person with neurodivergency continues to go to the grocery store and doesn't bring back what is necessary for dinner.
Which was me. It still is, even medicated, but really bad for the first 24 years of my relationship with Rob.
I think it's really weird for those of us who like make lists and we actually go through the list at the grocery store and make sure. Like I keep thinking, why?
Like, what are the obstacles?
Why would you not check that list before you go and make sure everything's in there?
Well, so there are.
But you forget there's a list, and it's not fun.
Oh, well, okay, yes, and yes. So a part of the things for me, and I'm not speaking for all people with ADHD, but like that particular issue for me, the reason why I don't like going through recipes, the reason why I have trouble with lists is I feel very suffocated and managed by them, because I like to be more spontaneous and creative, which also means that I tend to rely on my brain and my memory more than I should. And so the obstacles there for me are, by the time I get to the store, will be the very first time it will occur to me, shit, I don't know if we even have tomato sauce. Do we still have breadcrumbs? I wrote that we need this thing, but we might have it. But if we don't have it, it would ruin the recipe. So I'm going to buy another one. And
I think that's safe, actually. I don't think that's a bad choice.
So it drives Rob nuts.
That you have 2 breadcrumb boxes?
It will be more like 5. Because I will not remember that 5th time. I can't rely on my photographic memory of our pantry. And so we will have 5 containers of whatever. And he'll be like, can you record in your brain, hello, is there anyone in there? Will you record that you do not need to buy any more breadcrumbs? And then when I do make a list, when I go to the list, it's really annoying for me to continue to look at the list for some reason. And so I will just be like, oh yeah, I think I know what I need, or I forgot the list in the car or on the counter at home.
Do you feel like you want to rely on it to show that you're competent?
Maybe.
Like, is it a compensatory issue? Yeah, maybe.
I never thought about that.
Yeah.
Like, I should be able to remember.
I should be able to. I don't have a memory issue outside of ADHD, but you do, because that's a symptom of ADHD, as we're going to find out from our guest. So enjoy this. Like, we have so many examples. I think most of mine are professional, but, my relationship with you has been multiply.
You've learned a lot.
I was going to say challenged. I'm not trying to put a negative on it. I have learned a lot. But it has been challenging. It has been challenging. And like even our meeting this afternoon that we agreed to have, you said, can we meet afterwards? And I had already told you twice that we were meeting afterwards.
Oh, isn't
that interesting? And I'm
this is something that I'm confirming. Which to me, oh my God. Okay. So, in the episode when we were talking a little bit about like the differential diagnoses and thinking about like ADHD and OCD
and comorbidity,
perfectionism, like, is that two sides of the same coin? It's more of like this Marco Polo, like a little bit of an OCD sort of like just confirming.
So if I say we're meeting afterwards, let's meet afterwards.
Then my
being able to say, can we meet afterwards?
Well, so it usually won't be in that order. It might be like the next day or a couple of days after. And when I say it, it's less can we and more like, so we're going to do this thing, like a little, maybe an OCD check-in, so that it's sort of like.
Yep, I got that.
And then my anxiety will go down because it's like, oh, we're on the same page. Because one thing I learned, this is a couple of ways that I learned to think about ADHD. Is that everybody's brain is a glass jar with 100 marbles in it. And those marbles might be like tasks, people, important things to you, values, whatever those are. And the difference between the ADHD brain and the neurotypical brain is that we ADHDers don't actually have the glass bowl. We just have 100 marbles that we're holding in our brain hands, and we're always worried about the number 7 is going to fall through the cracks. Number 8, 9, and 10 just fell through. I was supposed to do a thing I don't remember. Did I write it down? Where's that sticky note? And so there is like going out afterwards to discuss A, B, and C is number 83 marble. And it's more of like, was I right about that? Are we doing that thing? Check in. Whereas you're like, yeah, we said that in 2022. I have it written down. It's in my schedule. And that's not how my brain works. But friends, without further ado, you will learn all about this and more. And then you will get to look like Doug, who you guys tell me, I have always thought he has ADHD, but he doesn't think he does. And he's not diagnosed, nor is he medicated.
I think I have a more obsessive compulsive nature. And
but I think those are two sides of the same coin.
They can be.
All right. Love you guys. You're going to love this.
Enjoy it. It's a good episode and it will help a lot of people.
Friends, without further ado, we are so excited to introduce to you the lovely and brilliant Elle O'Flaherty. Did I pronounce that correctly?
You did. Thanks.
She's an executive coach and performance optimization speaker with a subspecialty in ADHD coaching, which is why we found her and were obsessed and wanted her to come in. She works with individuals with ADHD and also couples that want to partner better around ADHD. She founded Interlace Solutions, which is a coaching firm that helps professionals and executives fulfill their potential. And she came to coaching after 17 years as a federal attorney and trade negotiator, which, if anything sounds like an ADHD career pivot, that might be one. Her work has been published in national and international media outlets, and her groundbreaking course teaching career coaches how to work with ADHD clients has been lauded by participants and coaching educators. She holds a JD from the College of William and Mary and a journalism degree from James Madison University, and she's a subject matter expert on international agriculture trade and World Trade Organization dispute settlements, which doesn't come up much. And this is my favorite. She lives in Washington, D.C. with her family and the most beautiful dog in the world, Penny.
Welcome,
It's
Elle.
true. Thank you so much. I'm so glad to be here.
I'm really so excited for this conversation for so many reasons. And one of the things that I think is that ADHD comes up more than ever in the history of my practice of 29 years. Like it is all over TikTok. It is in my clientele, particularly women in their 30s are identifying, some women in their 20s are identifying, some women in their 40s. And it's mostly women kind of coming forward and saying, I think I have ADHD. And I will have worked with them for years and not necessarily thought of that as what was going on. Yeah. And then I kind of went down this path of like, what impact does our cultural, our pandemic stress, our racial stress after George Floyd's murder in our city here, the political strife that we have. Like I couldn't figure out like which is which, is the distractibility from so much stress. So I'm very excited about this conversation because I think you're likely, and I love all of your background, by the way. I kind of want to talk about all of it. But I think we're going to focus just on the ADHD part today. But start by telling us a little bit about what your interest is about and how you got involved in making this your passion.
Yeah, well, thank you. Yes, I do have a little bit of a hard turn in my career. I'm one of those people who, as women growing up in the 80s in Virginia, of course, girls couldn't get ADHD, so I was safe until I was an adult and diagnosed. And not understanding that about my brain, I really chose an occupation that I excelled in. It was interesting, but it didn't suit my strengths and where I really shine. So I first got interested when I started working with executives and other folks who had ADHD and started telling me about some of their struggles, and they were really similar. I got very interested in ADHD coaching and started working with folks. And now it's just amazing working with people. And, we can certainly talk about why more people are getting diagnosed now, but
can't wait.
The most recent studies show that we're a little over 10% of the population. So
it feels like 80.
And I'm certainly not a neuroscientist. But I will say from what I've read, neurotypical brains under stress can start to have some of the same traits and look like ADHD brains. Folks with ADHD, we have physical differences in 4 regions of our brains, and how we uptake chemicals is different. But even neurotypical people can have some of these same challenges when they're under stress.
Oh my God, that is fascinating. Wait, can we do our first ADHD pivot? I have to know about the 4 different regions of the brain.
It's really interesting, and I'm not the right person to delve into this because, of course, I am not a scientist or a doctor. But yeah, they have done studies and looking at MRIs and things like that. And so it's interesting that it is a physical difference, especially coming from a place for a long time when many people didn't even really believe that ADHD was a thing. So we've come a long way, and the research is amazing. The last 5 or 10 years, what's been coming out.
Elle, I want to reiterate what you just said, because, when I commented initially on the impact of stress on very similar symptom presentation, right? And when you talked about like real stress can cause people who are not neurodivergent or to kind of go through that same sort of process of how they think and how they behave. Is it possible, from what you understand, that our neurology can change as a result of chronic stress and the impact on the brain? I realize I'm asking you another science question, but...
Yes. Again, as a lawyer, I'm certainly not qualified to answer, but as I understand it, having a background in some, trauma and understanding some of those things, like, yes, there are changes that appear, from what I've read, for people who, for instance, who have PTSD and other trauma responses, but it doesn't mean that it's molding neurotypical people's brains into ADHD brains. There are still differences. And I don't think that we can shape people into having ADHD brains. So it's not catching. Don't worry.
That's really good to know.
When I think about this, though, I think about attachment for people. And I think very secure attached people can become anxious attached if they're exposed to things. And I do believe, that's the whole point of therapy. Like if people can repeat patterns enough, their neurotransmitter and synapses can shift. They can open up new pathways. They can recover from pathways. That's why I'm curious about the possibility of some change in this. You know what I mean?
I'm wondering if you're curious in the direction of for a while, for a long time, people focused on, for folks who are neurodivergent, like on the autism spectrum or on having ADHD, on fixing us. And I don't see having ADHD as a bad thing. In fact, it comes with really incredible strengths. And in some ways, we are very much accommodating neurotypical folks because they can't do some things as well as we can. And so, no matter how we come about being ADHD, I don't see it as a problem.
Right.
So, and I've mentioned this before to our listeners on our podcast, but the way that I was diagnosed was over the pandemic. I was, doing all of my private practice at home with 2 kids kicking around who were in middle school and high school, and they had so many needs and they weren't able to focus, and it was all online. And without the external structures of the world, like them being at school, me being at work, and no distractions and not having to worry about making sure they're doing what they're doing, basically, we all started to unravel. And I was about like 44, 45. And I started to see that I thought I had a little like spazzy Tasmanian devil son who was just flying by the seat of his pants. And I had one little cat in a windowsill son that was on another planet, who was like a little astronaut. And then I was like the fastest hamster on the hamster wheel going nowhere. And there was no one at the wheel. And I was like, oh my God, I have been in practice for almost 20 years. Why did it never occur to me that we all have ADHD? This is a thing. And so we all got diagnosed. I actually got the boys diagnosed. And then anecdotally, I asked the guy, I'm like, I was kind of thinking maybe I would ask you if you think I have it. And he was like, we've been trying to get this, on the books for at least 6 months. So yeah, you got it. But so I know I'm not alone in this. And that just like you said, when you were young, girls couldn't get ADHD. It just wasn't a thing, right? Like nobody in a million years, if you weren't flopping all over your chair and making noise, no one would ever know. And so I'm so curious about why are women being diagnosed now in their 30s and 40s at such a high level?
Best guess of studies that we have seen are that about 80% of ADHD people are not diagnosed. And so it is vastly, vastly underdiagnosed. I will say that, for instance, the most common diagnostic tool that's used in the United States was developed by Harvard University and the WHO, and it's a symptoms inventory. And when you look at it, in my opinion, again, as a lawyer and non-researcher, in my opinion, it's very biased towards the stereotypical traits that a hyperactive type ADHD person would have. Of course, there are 3 types of ADHD: hyperactive, inattentive, and combined type. And that's me. And that's about 60% of us. So for especially women and girls who are perhaps inattentive type and also have been very much socialized to mask a lot of their natural ADHD traits, I think it makes perfect sense that they haven't been diagnosed, because doctors and other mental health care professionals haven't been looking for the symptoms that we tend to show. And also society has told us that we are not allowed to act that way. So we take a lot of energy and do a lot to mask our traits as women, particularly.
That really answered my question.
Yeah, that's got to be true. I also would say that we know that historically, like in the 60s and 70s, even boys, despite the fact that they probably are more diagnosed than girls historically, they also were underdiagnosed. These kids who were acting out in class were seen as problem people, right? And really, a lot of people grew up feeling like they just didn't learn well, or they were academically unsuccessful or failing, when indeed that was not the case. We have so many more resources available. So all of this is good, no matter how we look at it. All of it is good to have the discussion, have some sort of symptom presentation that we understand. I do want to continue on this path a little bit about, everybody kind of, and I do think TikTok, like I finally started looking at the TikToks on ADHD, and there's a lot of people saying I have ADHD. And I will tell you, I was with a psychiatrist friend a few months ago, and he said, you have ADHD. And I said, I don't. And he said, yes, you do.
He
I said,
does.
no, I don't. And he said, I said, tell me what you're seeing. And he said, you're rocking your leg. And I said, I just met you and I had an energy drink. So, I mean, I think it's an interesting thing. It wasn't that I don't want it. I just really don't think I have it.
Well, and I think that
you think I have it too.
I'm pretty sure he has it too. But you're also really high functioning. And I think that like I will notice that
hyperactive
hyperactive. And I think that like our symptoms show up in different ways.
Yeah.
And we will have this funny rub that like if he's talking about something that has nothing to do with what we're working on, I will try to get us back to what we're working on. And he goes, there's your ADHD again. But when I'm talking, he'll be like, oh, look at this picture of blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, yeah, you've got ADHD. But he thinks that it's my ADHD bringing us back to the topic. And also it happens the opposite sometimes, but mostly.
I know what you're talking about brings up a really interesting point because so many people resist getting a diagnosis of ADHD because it's so stigmatized in our society. And one study showed that more than 90% of neurotypical people have a negative association with ADHD. Another study showed that about 68% of ADHD people never disclose that we have it in the workplace. And of the ones who do, about half receive a negative reaction, including not receiving accommodations, being passed over for a promotion, and being fired. So there's good reason that you might be hesitant to join our community because we really are very, very stigmatized.
I feel like I am in such a place of privilege in my amazing career where I get to work with people that are struggling in whatever way.
Yep.
And one of the ways I see my role as a psychologist is to model being very human with compassion and self-love and an honest assessment of strengths and weaknesses. Like, I will talk about my ADHD as something that's my responsibility to manage. Like it should be an explanation, but not an excuse, right? But it explains a lot of things. And I'm responsible to kind of figure out how it impacts the world as little as possible in a negative way.
And I realize we're a little off topic probably here, but I think all of us have the responsibility to do that. No matter what our stuff is.
Exactly.
No matter what we bring to the table, we all have the responsibility to be upfront about that. And I have a specific question about your work comment, Elle, that I want to go back to. But, one of the things that we figured out is, when you need something off your plate,
yes,
you text me and you're like, can you take care of this? Or can you do this? Or can you do this? And I was like, don't manage me. That's not going to work well for our relationship. And she was telling me that it's just about getting it off her plate. And then it doesn't necessarily, although it sometimes does, my timeline on it, because I feel managed and I'm like, okay, that's not going to work for our partnership.
And so it's really so much anxiety for me around like, I've got these 20 to do things and like 8 of them I need your okay.
You were going to say delegate.
Or I'm going to start delegating because I'm learning about boundaries and self-care. But it'll be more like, here are the 8 things that are like, I need your okay.
Like in the middle of my patient day where I'll have like 8 to 10 appointments.
Right.
I want to go back to your workplace conversation, Elle. And I realize I'm going to just broaden this and we're off the agenda a little bit. But what I want to ask is like, how do you talk to an employer about this? How do you talk to your friends about this? How do you talk to people you're dating or married to or partnered with? How do you explain this to people? Because you're right. We don't want to ever be ashamed. Like I have OCPD. I have definitely an obsessive compulsiveness. My patients used to play jokes on me and like move a statue of mine on my bookshelf. Like they would turn it the other way to see how long. And I swear out of the corner of my eye, I can feel that energy that my little Buddha statue is the wrong way. So I definitely have a little of that obsessive compulsiveness for sure. But I'm curious how you talk to people about that, especially in a workplace where it could be not viewed in the way that we'd like it to be viewed.
That's a great question.
Yeah, well, I will say outside of the workplace with family and friends, I think it is absolutely critical for my clients to be successful to have loved ones that understand and support our brain types. Yeah. I actually don't ever approach it as a negative thing. It's really not. The way we go about things neurotypical people's brains tend to prioritize things based on importance. And it could be importance to them, to their partner, whomever. And they get a little hit of dopamine when they cross something off their list. Our brains lack that functionality. And so our brains are entirely interest-based. And so when we prioritize things based on interest, and it's not a good or a bad thing. I often use the metaphor, it's like being left-handed. And, I'm left-handed. It's not a good or a bad thing. It just is. But 90% of the world is not. And so things are built not for me. So when I get the right tool, like a left-handed can opener, suddenly it's completely easy to do. So I always approach it from a place of strength, and I tell people about all of the superpowers that come with it. And I encourage them to approach it that way with the people in their lives, because it's not a good or a bad thing. It just means that we often need to do things a different way. And unfortunately, having lived in a neurotypical society, we've been taught how to do things the neurotypical way. And when we can't, or it's hard for us, we assume that there's something wrong with us, which there isn't, right? Just like being left-handed.
Like, so do our partners. And that's why I feel like most people that are going to be approaching this with their loved ones, at least in my experience, I felt so validated. And also like the interest versus importance, that like blows my mind and is also very validating. But I feel like the experience of, oh my gosh, all of the things that annoy you about me, all of the things that you've been taking so personally because I haven't been able to remember the task you gave me this morning. I'm not remembering it on the way home, or all the things like he told me this, but I'd forgotten. And he felt like if it were important enough, I'd remember. I was able to say, like, my brain just isn't wired like that. I love you so much. Don't take these signs that I don't love you or care about you. So yeah, those are harder conversations. Like, it sounds like it would be so easy to be like, actually, it's a superpower. But meanwhile, our partners are like, I'm going to kill you.
A lot of times I really like to reframe and flip things on their head. I think it's really helpful for neurotypical people. So for instance, when something's really important to them, that they get something done, and they're telling their partner, this is important, you need to get it done. Conversely, when we get really excited and interesting about something, they might not get equally as excited. And it's the same thing, right? Like, we're not that interested in what they're doing, but they're not as excited about what we're interested in. And so I really like to give these kinds of examples. I think it helps people to understand what it's like.
So Talia and I just had this conversation about some podcast activity that you were like hoping that I joined you in this frenzy of activity. And I'm like, I'm not doing that. That's not going to be who I am or what I want. And so being able to have that conversation, I'm aware, by the way, as we have this conversation, we're making this label something that kind of constantly has to be brought up. Like, even when I say that's your ADHD, or you say that's my ADHD, or you might hear that L as well. I don't really love that, because we're constantly then, right? Like, it feels shaming. It feels like, and I have a couple that I'm working with in particular that's really coming to mind, where what's important for this one person in the partnership is not the same for the other person. And I've worked with him a little on the coaching part, like, let's make lists. Let's make sure you write down what that person specifically wanted from the bakery instead of what you brought them. But there's a part of this that, those skills don't necessarily translate either. I can't get my client to go back to the refrigerator and look at the list.
Right.
So
that's so real.
And I appreciate you nodding.
Yeah, no, of course. That's a really, really good example. For one thing, because hopefully you're also working with the other partner and saying, like, when your partner is really interested in something, are you then understanding that's important to them and, following that interest and accommodating it? But as far as helping ADHD do things that aren't interesting to our brains, basically trying to force ourselves to do something is very unpleasant. It's very unpleasant, and it is just not working with our brains. Instead, there are 5 main ways to add interest that work for us. I use the mnemonic funky, and please, it's not spelled right, but just go with it.
Going with it.
It's fun, urgency, novelty, challenge, and interest. And if we can add any of those 5 things, that's how to motivate an ADHD brain. So, for instance, most of us come naturally to urgency. like the paper's due tomorrow, so we're going to start tonight. That works. It's also incredibly stressful and it tends to burn people out. Instead, if we're able to do things like body doubling, which is where, for instance, you're in the same room with someone who's working on something, you both commit to work to something. At the end of the session, hour, 2 hours, however long, you check in. So you have a little like positive peer pressure. It creates some urgency and also can be some novelty and fun.
And accountability.
Yeah, and accountability. And it's such a more pleasant way to go through things rather than sort of berating ourselves and forcing ourselves to do things. Whenever something's hard for a client, I always tell them that is a flag going up. And it's your brain saying that something about this is not working for us. And our natural reaction from living in a neurotypical world is to then start bullying ourselves and trying to white knuckle our way through it. And as much as possible, we can stop doing that and using some of these other ways to motivate that are positive. It will make a world of difference, not only in getting things done, but also in our confidence and how we view ourselves.
You are brilliant. I am literally going to call you for coaching after this immediately. I mean, this is like life-changing.
Yeah, I want to, you might have said it, but I was so busy writing and I apologize. Let's go to urgency. Let's say there's a couple that is needing to sell their home and there needs to be a door installed and some linoleum or tile put in. And it's not interesting, fun, or
it's very low dopamine.
It's low dopamine. How might that apply to this like reframing?
So good.
Mm-hmm. First of all, this does not sound like you just made this up. So I'm curious where this
I did not.
He cannot confirm nor deny.
Some of the ways to do that can include, depending on what this person needs to do. If they are doing the tile job themselves, for instance, that's when we would want to couple it maybe with, we bring in the TV into the bathroom and they, are watching the Olympics, which they love, which is task bundling. And I love doing that. So doing something you don't enjoy with something that you really love. Having someone do it with you, we often tend not to want to work alone. It just feels sort of overwhelming and it's not our favorite oftentimes. So there's so many different creative ways to make things more pleasant. There's basically a tool for everything. And at this point, there's basically an app for everything too. So I always tell my clients, if you're having trouble, there is so much assistive technology now for folks with ADHD.
Oh my God, that is because I have always done that. Never knew it was called anything.
Task bundling.
Task bundling to put something that's like low dopamine, annoying. I always call it like tedious. It's like, for me, I went through a stage. This was before I was diagnosed and before I was on meds, that it was just like my entire life feels like it's spent cleaning the countertop. I'm wasting my entire life cleaning this fucking countertop, and there's always dirt and there's always and it was like and so what I would start to do is like, that's when I discovered AirPods. That's when I discovered podcasts and audiobooks and listening to my favorite music. And I would maybe, like, this is probably not healthy, but like in the evenings when I would feel really irritated that I'm always having to like make dinner and clean up after a long day or whatever that is, I would figure out ways to make that experience like I get to, not I have to, right? Which may sometimes include like I pour myself a glass of wine and I've got the candles on and the lighting's just right and blah, 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 to create the ambiance around the annoying task.
I want to clean at your house.
Yeah. I mean, I'm trying. It's still not my favorite, but at least I have
or
all
just hire a
other
housekeeper like I do.
Well, that is, I do have one. See, I have one every other week and I
know you do.
Adore her, but there are 1,000 gazillion minutes between when Lena comes, and there's a lot of teenagers and a lot of cooking and eating that happens in between.
Let me ask you a question. When you're cleaning, so we are very prone to perfectionism because our brains don't filter out as much information as neurotypical brains do. And so we tend to see all the things and often be able to see the perfect way something could be. And perfectionism is something that very frequently people with ADHD, we need to work through. So when you're cleaning your kitchen, are you like wanting to get into all the nooks and crannies, and does it feel overwhelming because you want to do it so well? Because one of the big things I teach my clients is, what's the easiest way we could do this? You know, if you have time, if you want to go back, you can scrub all the grout and do whatever you want to do. But what's the easiest way we could just get this done? And oftentimes that helps people do a task also, because it feels like it takes the pressure out of it and it feels less overwhelming.
You know, it's interesting. I'm doing this whole kind of comorbidity or differential diagnosis thing in my head because having done this for 29 years, having done practice for 29 years, I'm aware that I don't quickly go to ADHD about some of these symptoms. You know, I find myself, and I know that you feel I have ADHD, as does a buddy of mine. But, you know, when I work out, I either want the TV on or I want really, really hard dance beat music in order to work that treadmill, right? So I need that same sort of fun added to it. I will also tell you, because I think my diagnosis is more OCPD. I do. Like
the differential diagnosis. I know this is like, I'm also dying. And she touched on it. Like, is it OCD? Is it ADHD? Are they like two sides of the same coin?
So that perfectionism that you're talking about, Elle, I will absolutely be the person that can't start a task unless I have time to do it exactly right.
And that's what a lot of ADHD people do. I will say about 80% of us have comorbidities. So it's extraordinarily common in our community to have ADHD plus. Also, we have huge overlap in our traits with people who are on the autism spectrum, and about 30% of us are also on the spectrum.
Can you tell us what that overlap is?
I have this great infographic. So they're very much our sister, neurodiverse brain type, because we have a lot of overlap.
I'm going to add that infographic to our social medias, because I think it's going to blow our minds.
Do you want to know something just funny that just happened? Like, I was so focused on what you were saying, Elle, so when you talked, my brain couldn't tolerate it. And I'm like, I can't take in all that information.
That happens to us.
It happens a bunch. So it's really interesting to me because I got very singularly focused on what you were going to say.
Yeah.
So
much like our friends on the autism spectrum, because we don't filter out as much information, it can be really overwhelming. Like sounds can be overwhelming, or textures. I was putting together IKEA furniture for a friend yesterday, and the feeling of parts of it was so awful. I was having a lot of trouble doing it. And that's very similar to some of our friends on the autism spectrum. And so it's, there's a lot of overlap. And what you were saying is actually really, really interesting. There's another Venn diagram that I have of trauma, ADHD, and autism spectrum. And there are a lot of very similar traits. And so it can be difficult to diagnose. Yeah. I would also say, given how we understand inattentive type now, a lot of healthcare professionals don't necessarily know as much about that. I speak at a lot of conferences for therapists and counselors and doctors. And what I've learned is, at least what they tell me, the average doctor or therapist has received about 15 to 20 minutes of training on ADHD in their entire education.
Horrifying.
So most people I talk to, not all, there's certainly many people who are very trained and have taken on additional training, but a lot of people in the healthcare community don't necessarily know as much about ADHD as it would be helpful if they did.
You know, it's interesting, Elle, and I think I mentioned this to you, Talia. So my licensure is up in September and I need my 40 hours, right? And I saw this email suggesting a conference on ADHD. It's not what we thought it was. And so I'm really fascinated with the title, because I'm like, all right, I got to figure out what this is now, because during my training in the 90s, ADHD and the DSM-4 was very clear. And that's why I kind of don't go there right away, because I know what I'm looking for, but I think it's different. And I think the nuances and the pieces of it that we're talking about today, and I really do need to pay attention differently as a clinician. I want to keep very up to speed on what we're seeing now. And frankly, I mean, every single diagnosis, as we know from changes in every diagnostic manual from 1 to 5 now, we have changes in, like, I remember I was getting, it was in my internship, and my supervisor said, he has inadequate personality. And I said, there is no such thing. And he said, yes, there is.
It's the most horrible.
It's a horrible diagnosis, but it was evidently in the DSM-3 and not in the 4, right? And also homosexuality, which applies to me, was seen as a mental health disorder. So we make changes over the course of time, which I'm really, really eager to hear about these changes and nuances. And it's people like yourself, Elle, that are going to really provide what by the way, is a very easy to listen to explanation. The way you talk about this is very easy to hear and makes sense.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Well,
I'm not going to get done in an hour here. Go ahead.
Being a lawyer for almost 20 years apparently paid off. Yeah. So I would say it's interesting you bring up the DSM-5. This is not my professional wheelhouse, but I have a lot of beef with how we're portrayed in the DSM-5. It is, perceived as a mental illness, which I don't really agree with. I would also say that it only lists what is viewed as the stereotypical problematic traits around ADHD. I think that it very much perpetuates when people get diagnosed, either not wanting to be diagnosed, or when they get diagnosed and they first come to me, they are panicked. They think they're this very broken person. There's something terribly wrong with them. And that is simply not the case. And so I don't really use or enjoy the definition of the DSM-5. And in fact, I usually start most of my talks talking about how much I hate it. So no offense to, clinicians, but.
Elle, when you have people come to you, which by the way, I'm very confident I want to have you as a resource for coaching. Mm-hmm. I think there's so many of my people. I've referred some of my clients with ADHD. They come in with the diagnosis and having been tested and having been medicated, which by the way, kind of speaks to this being an issue as well, right? I want to know what you think about medication, number one, and our Adderall shortage in this country. But also I want to know what people typically come to you with in terms of symptoms. Are we talking low self-esteem, negative self-messages, strain with their partners and friends, suicide ideation? What is it that you typically see people coming to you with?
Well, I'll answer your second question first. It's interesting you mentioned suicidal ideation. I've actually been working with a professor at Kent State, and that's her area of expertise. We are about 600 to 1,000% more likely to have suicidal thoughts or activity. So it's really, I cannot emphasize how much it is detrimental to our mental health and to our self-esteem. The way that especially kids and the messages that they receive are raised who are ADHD. By the time the average ADHD kid is 14, one study estimated that we receive about 20,000 additional negative messages about ourselves. And so by the time people come to me and even know that ADHD coaching is a thing, generally my clients have extremely negative self-talk. They are hopeless. They don't have belief in themselves or their agency to make change. And it's very difficult. At the same time, having worked with school systems, most school systems won't give any sort of assistance to ADHD students unless they are failing academically. And there's a lot more going on here than just academics. There's so much we're taking in and assuming is true about ourselves. By the time they get to me, there's usually a lot of damage. And so the kinds of things that we work on, a psychiatrist diagnoses ADHD, a therapist talks about what's happened in the past and how it's affecting people now. And ADHD coaching, we're really about asking, okay, what's your goal and how can we get you there? And so just taking the power out of the idea that there's something wrong with us, connecting people to our community, and also showing, if you just make this little tweak in how you do something, it won't be hard for you anymore. And once people start to see those results, it is so powerful. Just giving people hope is amazing. Most people come to me for something like my partner or my boss says that I'm not turning things in on time. And then we kind of get into the bigger picture. It's all sorts of things. It can be anything having to do with executive function or interpersonal relationships. But I do find that it's pretty life-changing. I mean, as part of my training, I went through ADHD coaching, and I can absolutely say that I'm a different person now than I was before. As far as medication, as to studies that I've seen, ADHD medication is the most effective neurological medication that we have. Whereas most people think about Adderall or Ritalin, now we're getting at or near 3 dozen different kinds of medications that people can take for ADHD. So there are a lot of options, including stimulants or not. Yeah. I take medication and it has been extraordinarily helpful for me. And so for me, it was absolutely the right choice. I am very neutral on what people want to do. I think that it's, everyone's choice, but it is really very highly effective. The second most effective treatment option is actually ADHD coaching. And most
that makes sense.
people and a lot of mental health professionals actually don't know that. So I think whether or not people are going to take medication, somehow they need to get hooked up with someone who's going to give them the tools to do things the way that works for us.
I mean, that's when I, of course, interrupted you the first time. I mean, that's what I was thinking was so incredible, is that unless we as therapists are specifically trained to realize that we might have 20 amazing solutions for a problem of not being able to pay your bills, not being able to keep up with the laundry, not being able to A, B, C, D, E, F, G. And a neurotypical solution would be, oh, buddy, write a list. Oh, go on, look at the list and check things off the list. Oh, put the list on the fridge.
Guilty.
Oh, right. I mean, me too.
Yep.
And I have ADHD. And so like, even those of us that have ADHD who might be beginning a journey of self-awareness and understanding what of our brain and our behavior and our thinking might be ADHD related, we still, at least I'll speak for me, I have no freaking clue how to solve those issues, because the only solutions and organization I'm aware of is meant for neurotypical people. The journals or I don't even know. I could name a million. I'm all literally in my Amazon basket right now. I probably have 3 different kinds of journals, 3 different kinds of sticky notes and colored
We have
pencils
merchandise journals.
I know.
You should be using ours.
Those are different.
I am like making it my life's purpose to come up with some sort of ADHD organizing
that's really
system.
Good.
Because I haven't figured it out. And what I do know to be true is that sometimes I can spend 1,000 hours and hyper focus on this lofty goal of finding the perfect system.
Really?
Whereas if I just picked a fucking system and made it work for me, that would probably work. But no, I don't
also,
do
I would
that.
add, not just make it work for you, but pick a system that does work for you, that you're interested in and you naturally want to use.
There's that interest word again. And, I want to say that I think the same thing that would work for you as an organization journal may not work for somebody else, right? Because it goes back to interest, right? I want to make one last comment about medication that we concentrate on. I have found sometimes my clients who have been prescribed a medication are not compliant. Which of course impacts their functioning. And part of the organization needed to take a daily medication at a certain time under certain circumstances can be complicated. And so I've struggled a little bit with some people that I've worked with. Like, I'll check, are you taking your medication regularly? I forgot. Right.
And like, what are the obstacles in the way for that person?
So we got to make it fun.
Make it a habit.
We got to make it fun. Anyway. Put like flashing red lights around it. Anyway, it's really interesting.
That's a good question.
It's a really good, thank you. It's a really good, like, funky. I'm loving that funky acronym. I'm going to use it forever. And I couldn't hear what you were saying because I was writing down all the details about it, and CI. But the thing about it is, it makes sense to make it interesting or fun for somebody, right? I love the fun word in particular, because I think everyone can relate to that, but it's really important, again, for people, when you talk about the doldrums or the dooms or the white knuckling through an activity that you're not interested in.
That's the low. I always call that low dopamine task.
Well, it's
It's like, oh my God, I can't even force.
And I don't do that to myself anymore. I don't white knuckle my way through things. I don't force my brain to work that way. And I have to tell you, I'm so much more joyful now. It's changed a lot of things for me.
Elle, can I ask a weird question? Are you med compliant? Do you struggle to remember your meds?
I don't. I will say, as you were talking, I was thinking about, I love adaptive technology, and there is an app called Brilli. It's Brilli, and it allows you to create a routine. And every day, like when you run the routine, one card comes up at a time. It could be like brush your teeth, and a countdown goes. There's gamification, and it makes noises. And when you finish that thing, you just swipe, and the next thing comes up. And that helps us in a few ways because people with ADHD struggle with short-term memory. So when we walk into the bathroom in the morning to get ready, every single day, it's like the first time we've done it. Whereas neurotypical people have a routine in their brain. And so taking your medication is something you have to actively remember to do. But by outsourcing that and putting it on Brilli or something else, you'll find people are much more compliant with their medication simply because they don't have to remember all the different steps.
Okay, the other reason, and this is what we're going to move into next, is ADHD and the impact on relationships. But really what you are telling me is that there is adaptive technology and there's an app that takes over the nagging spouse that has executive functioning. Because that is like a part of the big rub is like, did you do this? Did you do this? Like every single, and it does feel like that. Like, why does it always feel like the first time? There are 29 morning tasks. And I'm always like, did I do that? Did I do that? Although I have found that creating a routine and being so like 6:05 to 6:07, 6:07 to 6:10. And it's like crazy, but that it's like once it becomes my routine, I'm very med compliant. I always remember to do A, B, and C. And I know that once it's 6:50, I need to be getting to blah, blah, blah. It's like it does. I want to give people hope. It takes a really long time. How many days does it take to create a routine in your brain?
For me, 1.
For me, 4,000.
Like, it's interesting you talk about the morning routine. I am very routinized every single morning, and it's really fascinating to even think about it. I don't think about it.
But
you know that I dance naked every morning in front of the mirror. Yep.
But this is what I want to know. Yep. Was it different when you had kids running around at home and a wife and a dog and the morning hustle and like craziness and everyone needs something? Because right now you are literally naked in your living room, doing whatever you want. Of course.
Well, my security cameras are on. Go ahead.
But I would probably be a lot more organized and able to have a routine if I could do that. And
do you think you would?
Now I would, now that I'm medicated.
I actually think you would. So I don't know. Yes, you're right. I mean, you accommodate and you adapt, which is a really important part of the coaching, I think, that you've got to be doing. Like if you have kids and if you have a partner and if you have a lawn and if you have whatever. I mean, just a million things on the plate, which all of us end up doing. But there's a part of this that, I find myself thinking, yes, it was probably different because I had to adapt.
Yeah, I wonder if you are compensating. If you feel like you really are ADHD, some of my clients are extraordinarily regimented because they have compensated for how our brains are.
That's me right now. That's definitely.
Yeah, but if you think about it, the other nice thing of having those routines is if you come in with your brain as a blank slate every time you have to do something that you do all the time, you have to make all those decisions. So you're using a lot more energy than a neurotypical person, and you're going to reach decision fatigue much earlier in your day because you've had to do so much more of just everyday things.
It's so brilliant. Okay, so there's like the short-term memory piece and the working memory, and it's hard for us. It drives our partners crazy.
We're gonna kind of go through some of the things that people present with, and one is distractibility, like when it's not necessarily clear, although I don't experience this a lot with you. I think
it's
when
so
I talk to you listen to me. You do.
Only if there's no one else around us. Like, that's why my job is so wonderful for me, because I can be so incredibly present when it's you and me and we're making eye contact and there's nowhere else I need to be, nothing else going on. But if the lawn company comes in the middle of a session and they're right outside my window, or if there's something weird happening outside the window, or like if you and I are like having a drink or out to breakfast and there's a lot of stuff going on around me, that external stimulus makes it so hard for me to just like zone in.
I have so much I could say about this, because when we're out for breakfast, remember, I like make friends with the server. Then I want them on the podcast because they have an interesting story.
It's true.
Do you get distracted by that, or do you like it?
I think I'm overcompensating, like Elle was saying, because there's something now that I'm medicated, maybe that external distraction, instead of me having that easy breezy openness to it, like maybe before I was medicated, now I feel like that is something that is pulling me away from my task. That is something that will now take 15 minutes when I was in the middle of a conversation with my best friend. Now I have to hold that thought. It's like, I'm not as like easy breezy. And so it grinds my gears unless I'm like, fuck it. Like, I'm day drinking with my best friend. I didn't need to be in the middle of that story. Like, I forgot the story. I forgot my goal. Who cares?
So, Elle, going back to the distractibility, which all of this is kind of fascinating. I want to know, like, how do you manage when you are needing to pay attention to someone in your life? How do you remember what that conversation is about if you're not interested in it, for example?
Well, yeah, and I'm glad that you put it that way, because I think attention deficit hyperactivity disorder is quite possibly the worst name for what we have, because we don't have a deficit of attention. We have a situationally variable attention. So if you're interested in having a deep conversation with someone, like, absolutely, we can be locked in. We will remember everything that happened, But when it comes to situation, when you're talking to your partner or someone else and you want to pay attention, there are a couple of things that I recommend. First of all, on your partner's side of things, if we are already focused or hyper focused on something else, that's probably either not a good time to try to engage us in a, important conversation. Or if they need to, I will often teach couples, say, so how do you best like to be interrupted, and what would it take for you to, refocus on your partner? And for some people, that's physical touch. It could be, I have a couple who exchanges like, are you focused on me right now? And then the other person will confirm. And so it interrupts that hyper focus. But yeah, I really think that it's on both partners. One, to make sure that it's a good time and the person is focused. And then the other partner getting curious about what's being said. I mean, most of the time, if hopefully someone is close to us is telling us something, then we're interested and engaged. Yeah. But I don't think that even if we're interested and engaged, it means we should necessarily assume that we will recall all the information. So I'm a big fan of note taking. I tell my clients, externalize your memory as much as possible, because there's no reason to add that stress. And a point that we already know is not our real strength. So there are a lot of things, but I do think it's a two-way street when it comes to partners communicating.
Honestly, Elle, every relationship is a two-way street, in my opinion, and it's about accommodating whatever people bring to that table. I've oftentimes suggested that people approach their partner with ADHD like, can you let me know when a good time would be to talk about this house project, right? Mm-hmm. And it does give some build up.
It's brilliant. And I have so many couples, right, that will be like, well, I shouldn't have to tell you to do the thing. Well, I shouldn't have to remind you. I shouldn't have to, right? And I'm always telling them, you shouldn't have to isn't going to get you the marriage that you want, right? It's like, if you love this person and you're trying to make this work, there are certain brain differences that you're right. It usually, when there's one person with ADHD in a couple, we are always talking about how the ADHD person can be better at executive functioning, rather than how do we partner together around how do you best like to be interrupted? And for me, it is touch. It is like, hey, honey. And then I'm like, oh my God, I was on another planet. I was on the planet Org. I didn't even know you existed, which is why I'm very easily startleable, because I'm often on another planet. It's just, you're giving us the greatest strategies that I've never even thought about.
It's equally as important for the neurotypical part of that couple to understand how much their ADHD partner is accommodating them, I think. And so one, example of that is ADHD people, we tend to be able to make connections really, really quickly. And so we'll say A plus B, so F. And if you're in a group of ADHD people, odds are we'll all be like, yeah. But if you say A plus C to F to a neurotypical person, it generally will be very confusing. They won't understand your idea or your logic. And so you have to fill in each of those steps because their brains are just different. And so sometimes when I start explaining that to the neurotypical person, they will feel a little uncomfy because no one's ever talked about accommodating them. But also it shows how the ADHD half of the couple has real strengths that are not being recognized because we all kind of, assume the neurotypical world is the way things should be done.
Oh my gosh. But that also brings up, I know that feeling, but it also brings up like if my partner will say like, how did you get there? And to me, it feels so obvious. What skill I don't have is filling in the DEFG part. And I'll get like irritated that it's like, oh
it also
God.
probably feels judgy. Like, how did you get that?
Yeah. Like
how strange of that.
Right.
I'm going to bring up something that's happened for you and I. When we have a guest on sometimes, and I remember the very specific thing, I asked a 3-part question.
Oh, that's so hard for me. That is so hard for me.
And it didn't go well because
Part
I was
A,
like
B,
focused
C.
on A, B, and C, and you had wanted to go on after A. And I said, but we didn't finish B and C. And you got very irritated with me on screen.
I did. I mean, we've been doing this a long time.
So I'm kind of interested in like, how could we have accommodated each other?
Oh my gosh. I love
differently, but you know, I'll give that some thought. We don't have to spend this time on our own relationship therapy.
We are getting relationship therapy right now.
It's interesting what you bring up because I work with a lot of executives and, you know, I'm in DC, so political appointees, all those good people. And one of the things I work on is they'll see the solution in the first 5-10 minutes of a meeting, but then still have to sit through the next hour, the next week, the next 6 months, while everyone else kind of gets around to that position. And it's incredibly frustrating. It's, you know, it's very frustrating. It's very boring for us. And we get annoyed because we're like, why is this taking so long? And it's because it takes neurotypical people generally longer to put together the pieces and to sort of socialize themselves with a new idea.
I mean, yes, that is for sure my experience, but which is why it's hard for me sometimes to be a member of the actual universe where there are other humans that have their own process. Elle, will you talk to us about like time blindness?
Yes, that's a big one for us.
That's a big one for us.
Yes. So time blindness is just, for anyone who doesn't know, it's the idea where we actually experience time differently than neurotypical people. So we're not only experiencing it differently, but it also makes it very challenging for us to estimate how long things will take. When we're in periods of hyperfocus, we don't notice time passing. And so hours and hours can go by and we are like locked on our piece of work, which is amazing. And it's why we're some of the most famous inventors, why we're 300% more likely to be entrepreneurs. But it also means that
100%.
sometimes 12 hours will have gone by and our, you know, people in our lives will say, where are you? What are you doing? So yeah, that can make it really, really challenging because we don't understand necessarily, or we don't in the same way perceive time. But here again is where a lot of technology is really, really helpful. Things like Goblin.tools is a $1 app that I love, and it breaks down tasks into small little, what I call micro chunks of tasks. And it helps to estimate how long it might take you to do those. So technology is kind of amazing these days and can really, really help with time blindness. And of course, good old fashioned timers and things like that. So we aren't working for 12 hours and not realizing it.
Right. I have a lot of ADHD clients also that will find themselves like they've missed 3 appointments. They haven't eaten since yesterday. They haven't gone to the bathroom, and they're just like, they sort of wake up from like a fugue state or something. But yeah, I mean, you're right. Hyperfocus is one of my favorite parts of ADHD. And what I'm always, I don't think I explain it well, but what I'm always craving is what I call like this creative runway or quiet time in my own head to do what I want to do and to think. And I just love the inner workings of my brain. But when you are a wife and a mother and you actually have a full-time job and there are living beings that depend on you to eat, and you like don't have the luxury of going into hyperfocus very often, but it's like my favorite.
It is our superpower. And it's, you know, it's really interesting. I don't think most neurotypical people really understand what we mean by hyperfocus. It is not that.
I agree with that.
Neurotypical people tend to call it the flow state. But when we are talking about hyperfocus, it is also like hyper productivity. And we are often able to do in a few hours what it might take other people, you know, even days to do. But what I like to remind my clients is because we love that feeling, we tend to berate ourselves when we aren't working in that way. And I always remind people that if you've done the work of a couple of days in an afternoon, you've also used up a lot more energy. And so the next day you might have like a hyperfocus hangover, or maybe you're going to bed early or something. And you just have to understand that you have to break some, put some time in there to recover from it. And I haven't heard, my clients generally haven't heard someone say that. And so I think it gives you a lot more grace to not expect yourself to always perform that way. And also to understand, like, you're going to have to pay the piper energy wise.
God, that's amazing. I've never even thought about that. And I mean, you're right. Like, I tend to think that that's when I'm productive. And so if I'm not in that state, I get so irritable and frustrated with external humans and tasks that I can't focus. I can't do anything unless I have this like runway or window of time. And then I get more irritable. But that is like such a loving and compassionate way to think about that. It's not really.
I'm thinking very deeply about all of this stuff and applying it not only to my client work, but truly our relationship. You are the person that I work the most with ADHD. The thing that I will note, and you've referenced this, Elle, like the compassion needs to go both ways, the understanding of neurodivergent and neurotypical and how they work together on some tasks. I think you have gotten very frustrated that I'm not on that path with you at times.
Yes.
Like I'm in my flow and I'm moving and why is not everybody else doing it with me? And I think.
Right. And Doug only responds to all the podcast stuff on Fridays from like 10 to 1.
I have boundaries. 10 to 10:05. But it's interesting to me because it's really on the other side. And I think it's an interesting thing for people to understand how to communicate that and how to be respectful about that and say, I feel like you're in this really big, flow of things. I'm not on it with you.
Yes.
And have that be okay.
And
have that be negotiated, right?
Let's find each other in the middle or like get back on the same page.
Yeah, get on the same page, which we're doing.
We're going to do that right after this.
We are actually, which is really interesting.
My favorite restaurant.
But I probably had a little bit of a pained look on my face because it can be really hard if you're on a journey, Elle, and you have this kind of flow going on and you're really being productive. Like you said, you might be in a business meeting or a work meeting and you're like, why the hell are these people not rushing through this with me? Right. And so that patience can be hard as well and create really difficulty.
Yes.
Right.
And it's something that generally neurotypical people don't even realize is happening, that we are doing this kind of accommodation. I just think it's really interesting coming from the majority, neurotypical folks. It's, again, to use that sort of handedness metaphor, when right-handed people will randomly pick up my left-handed scissors, the reaction is always like supreme frustration and a little bit of anger. They're like, why isn't this built for me?
That is so, what a great analogy.
The layers, Elle, of that, we could go, the world is, I could go so many places with that regarding gender, regarding sexuality, regarding mental health, regarding all of the things. So we could obviously talk forever about this topic, and we'll likely have you back for a second episode. But I am curious what you would say the benefits of having an ADHD partner or coworker or supervisee or supervisor. What would you say those are? You've hinted to a few.
There are huge benefits. I would say in the workplace, we tend to have big, innovative ideas, the kind of ideas that really, really change things and move things forward. We are not outside of the box thinkers. We don't realize the box even exists. And so this is absolutely the kind of person you want on your team to push things forward. We also tend to be risk takers. And so we help kind of move organizations along when they're stuck in a certain place. So there's a huge value to have ADHD folks on your team. As far as in personal relationships, also, again, we have big innovative ideas. We also tend to see the sky's the limit. And so we will think of really fun and creative and unique things to do. I'm married to a nuclear engineer. And so we always say that like he's kind of the flower and I'm the spice. And so, our kids have a lot of fun because we do some of my crazy ideas. And he helps to make sure the train runs on time. And it's just a really, really beautiful partnership. So I think if you can find a way to be cohesive, it can really be just such a great partnership with an ADHD person.
Oh my gosh. I mean, that's so beautifully said. I've never heard the flower and the spice, and also like fun, crazy, spontaneous. And then somebody needs to make sure the train runs on time. I can't tell you how much I love it. Okay. So here is what I feel like people are really wanting to know. And you've mentioned them throughout, and I'm going to pull together, we do these in newsletters, and I'm going to pull together all like the best bullet points of this, but like the tips and the tricks and the strategies, not necessarily for the ADHD person or the partner, but the idea of like partnering around ADHD. What would you recommend to a couple where ADHD has been a real challenge in their relationship?
Well, first I would say, and I always start when I'm working with couples, to get some foundational knowledge. There are some great, YouTube channels and things out there to make sure that everyone understands what encompasses ADHD and some of the ways that you can work with us. One channel in particular that I love is Jessica McCabe's How to ADHD. She's really engaging, and she could not be a better spokesperson for our community. So she's wonderful.
I love her.
It's great.
Once there's that foundation of knowledge, then I recommend getting curious and creative about how you can work together. So first, recognizing any pain points. And, for all of my ADHD clients, one of the first things I teach them is to pause and to plan. We have a action-tuned brain, and so we want to jump and get started and do things. We're doers. But doing a little planning, particularly with your partner, can make a huge difference, especially if you can make it fun, right? Like it doesn't have to be a combative thing. Wow. And then once that's in place, also adding some tools that work for you. And so it has to work for both partners. We're not asking neurotypical people to bend over backwards and become something they're not, certainly. But looking at, family calendars or, really for your routines in the morning, there are a million ways to do this. It just takes both people being curious and open to it.
Oh my God.
It's interesting, Elle. One of the most important parts I think that I gleaned from today, aside from obviously a lot of the very specific things, was this need that both parties need to accommodate each other.
That's right.
So it's not just atypical people making accommodations. It's neurodivergent people making them. It's going back and forth and working together.
And it sucks out the stigma of like, this is the wrong way a brain should work, and this is the right way a brain should work. And it's more, I love the curious and open and compassionate that like, how do we come together to find a system that works for our unique brained family?
And I think one of the pieces that goes along with that is what you said about the diagnostic manual. I mean, obviously, historically, that's been used to oppress. It's been used to persecute. Again, people like myself. I remember when I was in grad school, we were talking about like transvestism was in there. And I was like, this is a fucking joke.
As I got so angry. Illness.
Yeah, I got so angry and told my professor, and he's like, it shouldn't be in there. Be a part of the change. And I was asked to participate in the DSM-5. I did not have time. But I think there's a part of this that it's really about that. We got to take away that stigma, and we have to take away the reality that even if it is something that's listed to understand as a diagnosis and treat medically, it's really just something that, needs to be regarded and respected and understood.
Yes, that's right.
So, yeah, I think it's human nature to assume that to sometimes assume that something different is bad.
Of course.
And I still think we see vestiges of that all over the place, but certainly in the DSM-5, as you're talking about.
Yeah.
Elle, this was maybe one of the best episodes we've ever had. I am so impressed with your ADHD brain. It is just like a testament to how high functioning and communicative, and the way you see things is beautiful.
Well, the work that you've done, you've obviously done a great deal of work to understand yourself.
And years of therapy. So I respect therapists.
Yep, absolutely.
Elle, will you tell people how our listeners can find you? Please plug anything that you're working on that you want.
Can I ask before you give that information, Elle, are you open to doing remote work with people from different states and different countries?
Great question.
Yes. So my coaching firm is nationwide, and we also work with people all over the world. So absolutely. We are English speaking, unfortunately. I We're hired by a lot of companies who are looking to help their ADHD employees. And we also work with individuals who either are using it through their training funds or on their own to help with anything in their personal or professional lives. So our website is interlacesolutions.com. There's a button you can click if you want to have a consultation with us and just hear more and see if we're a good fit. I'm also very shortly releasing a course on nuts and bolts, step-by-step, how to conduct a job search or to pivot in your job as an ADHD person. And it's just, if there's one thing that I could really suggest to ADHD people, it's find work that works with your brain.
Wow.
That's where you spend most of your time. And it's so soul crushing to try to force yourself through every day. So that's really important to me too. And thanks for letting me mention it.
Elle, beautiful support today. Thank you so much for joining us. This has been really helpful. I think a lot of people will benefit. I'm going to actually refer a number of people to this podcast.
Yes, seriously. And we're going to find you. And are you on social media at all? Did you want to plug in on that?
LinkedIn. I'm on Instagram. I'm incredibly creative. So my handle everywhere is at Elle O'Flaherty. One word, no apostrophe. There are only 2 Elle O'Flahertys apparently in the whole world, and the other one's a professional soccer player in Ireland. So I got it first.
Not a bad connection, though.
That's hilarious. There's another Talia Jackson out there, too, and she's a famous actress. And I think people are disappointed sometimes when they see me.
There's really only one.
That's what I always say. These poor soccer fans.
Thank you, Elle, for your time today.
Amazing. Thank you.
Of course. Have a great day. It was a pleasure. Thank you so much.
It was a pleasure.
It's our pleasure. Thank you, Elle.
Well, what did we tell you? It was freaking amazing.
Episode. Yeah, it could have gone on longer. As usual, I kind of find myself, of course, ad-libbing because I have specific anecdotes from my professional and personal life.
Oh, and I never share anything personal or professional.
Yeah.
Just kidding. I'm a total blabbermouth. If you found today's episode valuable, which I'm sure you did, please subscribe, find us, send us to your people, wherever you listen. Just if you know somebody who's struggling in ADHD relationships, if they're the one that has it or they're the one that doesn't, send it to them. Who needs to hear this? And for extra bonus points, if you rate and review, it somehow boosts us to the top of the podcast universe. So thank you in advance.
I don't know how that works. I also want to say, I'm not sure there's anybody who's probably not impacted by this ADHD episode. So I think everyone could benefit. Everyone has come across somebody, whether you know it or not. Because again, there's stigma around it. So people may not be identifying that they have been diagnosed or that they are treating it through, Adderall or Ritalin or some other form of the couple dozen that we have now. I also want to say, go to we'renotfine.com, no apostrophe, we'renotfine.com. You can subscribe, which is a really important feature. I'm just finding out. I was out with friends, and I might have mentioned this before, but out with friends, and they're like, when's the next live event? I'm like, oh my God, I'm not even telling people about it. But you can find it by subscribing, and you'll get an email kind of reminding and keeping you updated on what's going on. Mm-hmm. We also have a button that you can click if you have any questions at all about how mental health meets relationships or just relationship issues in general. We would love to hear from you, no matter what the idea is, no matter what the topic is. We would love to hear from you. And of course, we'll cover it on the web, on our podcast. So you get some kind of free kind of discussion about it that might be helpful. We might even have a guest that is an expert in that topic. Mm-hmm. And on August 11th, just to reference it, you can also find this click on to Eventbrite. August 11th from 4 to 6, we have a live event at the Rogue Buddha studio with our incredible buddy, Nick or Nicholas Harper. As somebody was like, who's Nicholas Harper on the art?
He's the best artist on the planet.
Best artist and such an amazing guy. Call him a dear friend. I'm very grateful for this friendship. But I want to say 4 to 6 on August 11th, we're having a couple dealing with postpartum issues and all that goes with that, as well as both the man and the woman in this heterosexual couple are going to be talking about their experience. Both are critically important because, of course, relationships take two. And then we have someone who is going to be a hormone expert kind of talking about what the science is about what the hell is going on in the postpartum experience?
And even more than the postpartum experience, it's the hormonal roller coaster that most couples that involve a cis or biologically, born woman deal with. So it's like the IVF piece, it's the postpartum depression, psychosis, anxiety, whatever that is. And then also kind of falling into perimenopause and menopause stuff.
Yep.
It's going to be unbelievable. So yes, register and find us on social media. This handsome young man over here is Douglas L. Jensen with an E-N. Dr. Talia Jackson, Dr. Talia Jackson.
Hey.
And We're Not Fine Pod. And we're also on YouTube, which is fun. We're on TikTok, and it's all either like We're Not Fine or We're Not Fine Pod. You will definitely find us.
Faux show.
So we're not fine.
But at least if you come to one of our events during the hot summer months, you can get one of these handy dandy fans that have our picture and our logo on it.
I mean, come on, guys. We're literally giving these away. Can you believe?
As our entire crew and our audience got really, really hot the last event. So
just because it was such a good event.
We'd love to see you there. Enjoy this episode, and we hope to see you soon.
Bye.